My name is Katie Delmay, and I am just delighted to welcome you all to this Artist's Perspective by Shinique Smith. As a curator, I became really interested in Shanique's work during our presentation of 30 Americans, a show that you may remember we hosted in the fall of 2013 that featured 30 different contemporary artists. And I found myself really drawn to her work because she was able to so seamlessly and beautifully combine a broad array of influences, from graffiti to Eastern spirituality, to dance, to poetry, and create objects that were at once deeply personal expressions, yet also resonated on a universal level, addressing notions related to memory, materialism, childhood wonder, and human relationships. I was also intrigued by her ability to take discarded, used objects and to make this meaningful art, to make something important out of nothing. I knew I wanted to see more of this work and present more to our audience, and so we were very pleased when she accepted our invitation to be featured in our Gordon Contemporary Artists Project Gallery. Before I let her take the stage, I'd like to briefly share some biographical highlights. Shinique Smith was born in Baltimore and attended the prestigious School of the Arts before earning a Bachelor of Fine Arts in 1992 and a Master of Fine Arts in 2003 from the Maryland Institute College of Art. In the 11 years between these degrees, she worked in the film industry on the West Coast. Almost immediately after graduate school, Smith caught the attention of the national, even international art scene, and has been featured in many group shows, including Unmonumental, The Object in the 21st Century at the New Museum in New York, Altered, Stitched, and Gathered at the PS1 Art Center, also in New York, Frequency at the Studio Museum in Harlem, Recognize Hip Hop and Contemporary Portraiture at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., Spun, Adventures in Textiles at the Denver Art Museum, and Painting Outside the Lines at the Contemporary Art Museum in Houston. She's also been featured in many solo endeavors at museums such as the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Savannah College of Art and Design, the Museum of Contemporary Art in North Miami, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and a major show that just closed at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, where she also received a Master of Arts in Teaching in 2000. Smith's work is found in several prestigious private and museum collections, such as the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, LA County Museum of Art, among many others. She has been awarded the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Award, the Alumni Medal of Honor at Maryland Institute College of Art, and a Joan Mitchell Foundation Fellowship. She's also been a visiting artist and lecturer at many schools, including Yale University School of Art. And next up for her are major public mural projects in Aspen, Colorado, as well as Philadelphia, and I know that those will really engage their communities. So with that, please join me in welcoming to the stage the painter, the sculptor, the video installation and performance artist, Shinique Smith.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today to allow me to share a little bit of my work and my history and influences with you. And thank you, Katie, for such a lovely introduction. Einstein said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. Is the source of all true art and science, and he to whom the emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed." And I just say that because, you know, the title of my show is Wonder and Rainbows, which at first glance is kind of maybe a very light perspective of the world. But for me, it's the view that I choose to put my energy towards today and in my life and in my work. So I'm from Baltimore. I grew up in an area called Edmondson Village, which people lovingly call the Village. It is in the inner city of Baltimore. That's me on the left there. In my grandparents' backyard, I used to sit on this rock that when I was little, you know, when you're little and you see things so much differently, I thought of it as this boulder. And I would sit and contemplate the grass there. And my granddad grew corn. He's from Virginia and, you know, from farmers, and he could grow anything. He didn't have past a 4th grade education, but he could make anything grow from anything. And so I would sit in this yard thinking of it as a much larger patch of green and not realizing that I was sitting on just a chunk of cement. And I show that image because I feel like that view of such a simple object affects me today. So my mother designed clothes when I was a kid, and she made a lot of my outfits. That was one of my favorite outfits. That was kind of this is the 70s. So, and I'm kind of vamping it up. It's quilted. It was a quilted cotton, and on the right is me in undergrad in my grandmother's living room. So my grandmom decorated with a whole bunch of different patterns. She made things beautiful out of whatever was available. And even though at times we didn't have very much, there was this positive energy in my home. And also, you know, this making things beautiful out of what was available. I put in a couple of objects that, as I've grown up, you know, because the idea of wonder it's funny. When we're kids, we experience it like 99%. And as we get older, that percentage of how we view the world lessens and lessens and lessens. And somewhere along the way, there were some, you know, events in my life as a catalyst. And through my work, I started to look back into my youth and try to pinpoint objects that's created, like really made my imagination move forward and carved who I was today. So there are these objects. Raggedy Ann was like my best friend. Nobody else would be around, and I'd cry on her. She's like very damaged. I don't know if you can tell. And then tear-stained face and lots of scars. And there were books, you know, that I read as a child and that were around me as people around me, my mother included, were investigating different forms of spirituality or philosophies, were around me while I was reading children's literature. And so it starts with this book on the upper, I don't know if you can see it, it's I See Something Red. I started thinking about this book in terms of the show because of the rainbow situation. And where my first representations or knowledge of color came from. And it's such a basic book. I see something red. An apple is red. I see something green. There's a green clover. Yellow, a lemon, and so forth. And even looking at these like little illustrations, as a child, you could imagine the object being there. And I feel like these illustrations and also the mythology of fairy tales, and you know, they give you this sense of mystery and looking beyond adventure, an idea of another world. And these objects and books and ideas have affected me. Also, my grandmother, you know, the only artist that she really loved was Romare Bearden. And Baltimore Museum of Art had a lot of Romare Beardens there. And so we had a lot of posters around. And also, we would watch like Sanford and Son, and he's a junk collector. So I realized not that long ago that I think somewhere between my grandmother's patchwork mix of florals and brocades in the living room, sitting in that installation with my family, with these images of collage on the wall of Black life, watching Sanford and Son on television, somewhere in there, my aesthetic developed. Fashion figured into it. My mother's design on the left here, Vivienne Westwood, early Vivienne Westwood, Harlequin on the right. My mother studied fashion design in New York and in Paris, and one of her favorite artists was Erte. And she wrote to him when I was a kid, and he wrote back, and he became a mentor of hers. So his art was the first art that I tried to copy. And it was impressed upon me that he didn't work from sketches at the time, that she would watch him and he would formulate these things in one stroke without backing up. And it got into my head. And also as a kid, I studied ballet, and my mom really tried to bring in all the different influences of art to spark my imagination. But on the right is Bill T. Jones, and Keith Haring has painted his body. And for me, it's kind of, this image is the culmination of a lot of influences for me. Dance, gesture, graffiti, tribal art, and so this is something I look back to. So to graffiti. I had a classical training. I went to a high school for the arts, and I wanted to study dance, but I kind of got ushered into the art. People saw something within me that I hadn't actually seen yet when I was a kid, and so I had very classical training. This is an image of an alley in Baltimore, where as a kid, in School for the Arts, I started to tag, and my friends were graffiti artists, so that became an influence on me. And this idea, like, through graffiti and the experience of the city, this is like 1984, 85. This is before drugs really hit Baltimore and guns were really prevalent. It was a safer city to go around, and there was a sense of wonder that I got out of going out. We treated the city as a sort of playground where escalators became, the section between escalators became a sliding board, where public fountains became like a kind of swimming place, and you start to see, alleyways as pathways, much like when you're a kid and you think of, small places or little, like the secret garden. I started to see the city in that way. And when I went back to grad school, I wanted to engage this line that had been infiltrating my work. I had been working figuratively, and I pretty much stripped everything away, and I wanted to just start back with the basics, at first with just black and white. And when I did that, writing came out. I had taken courses in Japanese calligraphy in undergrad, and these are things that I was doing in grad school. So it started, taking the calligraphy and the graffiti and following it without knowing why exactly, and figuring it out as I go. Writing on the wall, cutting things up, abstracting things, being influenced by scarification, tattooing, and using text on the body. And when I started to write and use calligraphy as this means towards making something abstract, because at once it's, for me, text, even though you can't read it, it's kind of a figurative, like concrete thing in my mind, but that can also exist as a wild gesture on the wall. So I started to use bits of song lyrics and bits of poetry, and I found myself wanting to make affirmations out of them. The more I did it, the more I wanted to use it as a form of meditation in some way. And then so I start, and I always do this, go back and forth to go back to what influenced me, what I looked at. This is a Jackson Pollock. I had been struck with him, going to art school, looking at abstract expressionists. On the left is Joan Mitchell, and on the right is Robert Rauschenberg. When I first went to MoMA, this was on view and as a kid, and it really affected me because, and it still does, because the quilt that's there can exist as a quilt and maintain its identity of what it is and evoke the idea of a bed. And as something that we've all used and had that experience with, still give you that kind of memory, but exist as color and pattern within a composition. And in my earlier training, constant drawing classes, constantly looking and drawing drapery, carving light out of charcoal, erasing, molding light, because I was taught that you can't abstract life without knowing how to perceive it, without understanding how things exist in space and being able to render that. This is Dürer and Da Vinci. It's not me. I wish I mean, the seal kind of gives it away. But these were things that we would copy in school, and these are things that still influence the work. So I'm pouring in. I kind of, the way that I work, this is kind of like Pollock and Dürer influencing me with graffiti. I started using fabric as a surface and wanting to explore it further, using, the idea of, back to the Rauschenberg with the quilt as pattern. I started stretching and draping fabric and painting with it. And then I started thinking about it more and more in terms of like meaning and like the bandana. Like when I made this piece, I was making mandalas and using the circle. And I started thinking about the bandana and denim, and how those two things manifest throughout all different pockets of our society and in different places in the world, and how people can attach meaning to different colors and patterns of a bandana to represent different groups. And denim, well, I don't even have to say. We all know. We all have a pair of jeans at some point. And so I started using the techniques that I would use on my jeans as a kid, like bleaching and writing in pen, doodling, and just exploring the material as much as I could while trying to figure out the meaning. So at this point, I'm living in New York and seeing things that I hadn't really seen before in terms of the way people package and move things about. This is an image I took up by Penn Station 12 years ago with African bag sellers carting their bags around. Their knockoff market was very big at the time, and so there are these sheets wrapped around wrapped around purses and being moved around on these dollies and all together in a group. It was just really exciting for me to see. And seeing a lot of excess and the way people discarded things, and starting to think, and living in Brooklyn where people leave things out with this unspoken gesture that someone else can take it, and how we put things out made me start thinking about nomadism, like being nomadic and taking things with you, and the care that one takes with your objects, no matter how many you have or where you are, whether you're putting it out for recycling, and the care that you take to duct tape it or tie it with twine. That and articles about the used clothing industry and shipping things afar affected me, and I wanted to work with fabric in a more concrete way. And one day I just took a pile of things. This is my first sculpture, because I hadn't studied sculpture. I was drawing and painting, collage, my whole life, like high school, undergrad, grad school. So I didn't know what I was doing, and I took some old paintings and clothing and things like that, and I tied it up with this ribbon. And something about it felt very solid and complete, because I was doing a lot of things on the wall which are ephemeral, like the piece in the gallery now, that would exist during a show and then disappear. So I wanted to explore this further, and I started packaging up individuals' clothes. On the left is Louise's bundle, all coats from one woman, all the same coat, the same exact jacket in varying shades and colors. And so my working with fabric and clothing became as much about the identity of the person and what they might have been thinking, but as much about color and form, using fabric and color, the color that's existing in the world already, that I didn't have to invent it, I didn't have to make it up. And it was kind of freeing for me to work on sculptures as I would a painting with clothing. As I'm exploring this, trying to figure out why I'm tying stuff up, I thought, I'll film myself making one, and I did, and it was really boring. It was like, what? So I don't like watching people make art. It's like watching paint dry to me. But that impulse, that feeling made me want to apply the same gesture to my body and become a bundle. Instead of being on the outside tying it, I wanted to tie myself into it. And so that was my first performance. So I keep going and tying things up, but doing calligraphy like in a separate way. And then I started to see why and where they could negotiate together. And also still exploring and thinking about my youth. The Giving Tree was such an important book for me when I was a kid. And the idea of the tree and this relationship with the boy, I made several pieces about that. Then I started bringing those influences into the work. This is kind of my version of the Giving Tree. It's a stump after she's like given and given and given and given like all her apples away, and then she got cut down. Yeah, but I wanted to make a bale still, and I had to figure that out. This is a real bale that was shipped to Africa from an exportation company in Boulder, Colorado. I borrowed it for the length of a show that I had there, because they wouldn't sell me just one. You had to buy like 100 of them. This particular one is no taller than the podium and about this wide, but it weighed 800 pounds. Yes, talk about solid, right? People would come in and try to punch it to see how heavy it was. But the thing about this as a form that was attractive to me is that it is this complete, pure cube, but then within it is mashed up all these different things from different people, and it's kind of an equalizing gesture. All economics, all different places and races in one compact cube. And this was something that I wanted to explore as an idea and, as a concept and as like a system, a way of working collage. So I went on to start making different forms, including different things, exploring ideas of, what does utopia mean? And how does that figure into how we consume things? We want to wear Burberry. We can't afford the Burberry. We buy the fake Burberry scarf, and it gives, people that lift, that they're, like kind of faking it till you make it thing. What about a suit? The idea that some people have like multiple suits, like Gatsby having thousands of shirts, and some people have the one that they inherited that they wear to job interviews and special occasions. So there are ideals set to certain objects of clothing and objects that we have or get rid of, and I wanted to keep exploring that, and maybe I have imagined histories. And to me, the articles of clothing contain mystery, which gives me a sense of wonder. And, thinking back to the idea of Oz and wanting to be over the rainbow, somewhere where troubles are far behind you, and how these little things like still exist, and the idea of a path and ruby slippers, every step of the way, like making art, looking back. This was my favorite dress when I was little, that I still have. And I think it's loving this print when I was a child and looking at, Wizard of Oz and different fairy tales that still affect me. This is a photograph that I had taken of my aura in Washington State at a festival. And it's a machine that you sit and it reads the electromagnetic field around your body. I took 2 different ones. This one was when I was feeling the best in my life, the most complete. And I took another one right after my uncle died, and it was all red. So I don't know if I believe it exactly, but there's something mysterious and, I don't know, that sparks my imagination about this photo and this idea of myself, and the fact that a rainbow could exist around me that keeps influencing the work. So that's Frida Kahlo and Jimi Hendrix. I'm always looking at fashion and pattern and being influenced, Pucci and Vivienne Westwood, by the things that we make and what we produce as human beings. And I like to bring all those things together. And the act of tying and the act of writing are the same thing. Everything has this bodily linear gesture, and they act in the same way. One's 2-dimensional and one is 3-dimensional, but they all tie together all these little bits and pieces that come from different people or come from myself. And in some ways I feel like that's how, I'm very drawn to these things because that's how we're all connected, I think. I'm also drawn to the idea of place and belonging that is attached to objects, and the idea of a bedroom. So I've made a lot of pieces that reference place, that have floors in them. This particular piece here is, I broke up with my then boyfriend, and he left a bunch of stuff in the apartment. And he said, you should make art out of it. And not in a kind of bitter gesture. I did. It was more because, the things that he left were kind of cool. This was his stripe period, obviously. And he was done with stripes, so he left them behind. And for some reason, he had an inordinate amount of socks and change. So I kind of made this little shrine at the bottom of it with the floor. And the background color was this compromise color in our bedroom. I had wanted a robin's egg blue and he wanted gray, so this was the compromise, misty air. So this is the idea of socks, like something so simple. This is my grandmother's neighbor's house, Mr. Bowden, who I've known my whole life. But when I went to visit her one day, he must have had it was his sock day. He only washed the socks and he only hung them up. And things like this, things in the everyday, things I find on the street, these are some images from Brooklyn, spark my imagination, especially like these little red shoes, going back to Dorothy and the slippers, walking along, going to the corner store. Who left these slippers? Where did she go? How, these implied narratives that I don't know if you do that as well. When you see strangers in a restaurant and you wonder what they're talking about or imagine what they're thinking, we kind of impose perception, imagine what's going on with each other. On the right, I happened upon this image of bowls and water and carpets carefully placed under this graffiti that was like a scroll. And I was like, why would someone do that? Later I found that there was a really large group of stray cats in the neighborhood. But that image, the sense of place, and it had this Zen quality to it in the middle of the city. Things like that, how we use bedrooms as a teenager, and how we cover them with all the objects of who we aspire to be, what we're interested in, are attractive to me. And so I'm culling from those things, culling from my youth to make art. And that piece on the corner sparked me to make an installation. This is called No Dust, No Stain. It was not an artsy place, in the Essex Street Market on the Lower East Side. It was a little storefront. It smelled like fried food. And so I transformed this storefront in the market into a safe haven. This was my first interactive piece. It was like a little meditation space with all the found objects, and people were invited to take off their shoes and relax and write on the wall. And most people wrote prayers at the end of the day. I would come in and clean and change the water. This is another iteration of it for another show. But this is an idea that continues in my work. The idea of home or not having one, what we cherish, what we pass up on, how we change, and how the perception of green changes, and how we can look for those things and find wonder in the everyday. So I'm going to flip through. Because it's everything that you're seeing are things that I'm investigating and being influenced by in art, in architecture, in science. Also, the idea of being transported and where that lies in a spiritual realm. I'm using my work in a way to balance myself and give myself a sense of joy and exploring things in nature and in life and pulling them together using many different materials that are available. I have a lot of images. I talked faster than the images went, so forgive me. That's a lot of pictures. So, traveling, seeing the northern lights has affected the work and influenced a lot of the works here. And so seeing rainbows in just an oil slick or in a puddle in the parking lot, that's what I'm talking about finding wonder in the everyday. And, because I think it is important to making the world a better place. Not that I'm not necessarily saying that that's what I'm doing, but that's what I'm striving to do. Because even though, joy to me is not something that's easily come to. It's something that you've gone through trials and tribulation and somehow let go of it to find an ecstasy and a beauty within yourself and within the world. And this is kind of what is the driving force of the work. So, I'm towards the last images. Actually, this was on the card. This is a mural that I did in Boston last year that just came down. And as you know, as I said before, I've been influenced by dance and, the body and how these things figure together with pattern and color and gesture. And I've recently started to collaborate with dancers and bring that back into my work. And I had the opportunity to do a commission on the site where this mural is with a group of dancers in Boston, which just finished recently. So I'm going to end with a clip from that, and then we'll open it up for questions. Oops, should I have done that? Yeah, but it's fine.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions for Shinique, she said that she'd be generous enough to answer those. So if you could raise your hand, I'll come and find you with the microphone just so that everyone can hear your question.
Yes,
ma'am. Okay, when I saw your work here at the 30 Americans, I'm kind of overwhelmed a little bit. This is really weird. But I thought of a movie called The Gleaners. Are you familiar? Is anybody familiar with The Gleaners?
I've heard of it.
Les Gleaners, I think it's French. And I went to that movie many years ago. I think it came out 10 years ago. And I went with a friend and I was transfixed by, they spoke to, they interviewed and documented people who were homeless and gleaned things out of the dumpsters to live. They interviewed famous artists who gleaned things for their work, like you do. It was from A to Z, and it was so moving. And we walked out, and I was so transfixed and moved, and my friend said, well, all those people were crazy. And so I was like, so ever since then I've been seeking out art and seeing like the Romare Beardens and of the world and you. And when I saw your work, I did have, I was transported back to my childhood when I did see wonder in everything. Whatever you were intending to do, you did it to me. I'm very, very moved by your work. But so I was transported back to my childhood, but I was also transported back to one of my earliest memories was looking at things that were consumed or bought and then discarded and put in the garbage and freaked out by, where do they go? Literally I would go, where do they go? The world's not that big. Even though I was small, I knew the world was not as big as people thought it was. And so the resources that went into it, I started thinking of that when I was really little. And I love that you use all of these objects and make beauty, but I wonder if you do have in your process have to work through that kind of crushing. To me, it can be alternately, like I can find joy in objects, but I have to work through it's kind of crushing the amount of objects. It's so in your process, have you had to, I don't know, I'm not making sense really, but have you had to work through some kind of overwhelmed feeling from objects? Because I have to work through that all the time. But I still find beauty in them, and thank you for what you do. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And for the question, crushing, I think I would call it melancholy or, in depression. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed not so much just by objects and how much is consumed, but by the whole thing in life. It's not easy being human, and I think we're fragile in different varying degrees, and I think for me, what's overwhelming more than that is the violence and sadness and personal hardships. I have my emotional ups and downs and things I go through financially, with love, with family, loss, all those things that we all go through, I go through, and I feel fortunate that I have a channel for the energy. And so I guess I use that as, I think everything starts with an emotion. Maybe even before, someone asked me yesterday, how do you begin a painting? And I was talking about writing. I begin with the gesture or the idea of a color, but I think in honesty, it might be an emotion, like how I'm feeling in the moment and what I'm going through. And then I use the work to move through it. And I use it to express myself and then step back, think of it from a distance, and objectively edit it, go back into it with emotion, and find my way out of it. That's what I meant with joy, or like the epiphany of a path or journey isn't easily won. We were talking about butterflies last night. Someone asked me, why are there butterflies, in my work? And Katie and I had been talking about how it's the rainbow and the butterfly are girly, or like, sometimes frivolous, the idea of frivolity, or not serious ideas, but they are things that occur after trial or tribulation. The path of a butterfly is not easy to metamorphose. That I'm getting far away from the idea of the objects and the use, but sometimes I guess instead of being crushed, I feel guilty for using things that other people need and could use to make art. And is that valid? And is it valid to address beauty or joy in the work too? And so I balance that out with doing things, giving things away as much as I take.
Do we have another question? Yes, one moment while I get back there with the microphone.
I am certainly engulfed by your creativity and all that you are. I think that the crushing that this lady speaks of is a form of evolving from one set of circumstances or one media into another, like leaving this life, going into another life, or into a death, which some people may call. It's an evolving to me, and I see it in your work that you are so well-rounded and so creative as far as your changes and able to take one form and turn it into something else and make it beautiful and make it something that everybody can hold on to and touch. And I commend you on your work. I think you're extraordinary, and I think your mind is just unbelievable. And you have those creativities, those juices, that movement in your work that suggests eternal life. Your things continually live.
Wow.
I enjoyed this.
Very well said, sir.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for saying that and sharing that and feeling that. It's, all of those ideas of transformation or evolution or beyond life or what exists, like who we are, why we're here, all those questions or things that are being poured into the work as I'm discovering myself, and is kind of a form of alchemy in a way to transform things. And so it means a lot that you picked up on that. And I think all of those things are things that I'm negotiating as a being. And I think I'm happy that you feel that it touches a lot of people and that it reaches out, because I feel like I am reaching out and that there's an exchange of energy going on as I maybe wholeheartedly sometimes pour myself into something. But I don't want it to make it about me in a sentimental way. Like, I don't want to, like, excuse my language, bitch about my life in my work to you as the viewer. I want to have a more positive kind of like moving forward, transformative exchange. And that's not easy to come by. And I think it comes out of an empathy. And when I'm talking about objects and things, as much as like I'm horrified by us and sometimes like really disheartened, disillusioned, and angry, at the end of the day, I think there's a beauty in us as a human and in the world, and there's an empathy for the things that we do and put together, and the little, you know, like all of us had grandmothers for the most part, and, you know, and have someone who loves us, even as much of a jerk as someone is, they might have been a hero to someone at one point, and seeing life that way helps me move through it. and that's what the work comes down to, and the things that I use are things that I'm drawn to: pattern, color, gesture. The calligraphy is how I can put myself and the emotion in the writing, and the objects are how I put everybody else in with myself and my friends and family. So thank you for that.
Looks like we have another question here at the front.
From Ashanti. You have a name tag on.
Hi, my name is Carrie. Well, when I looked at your artwork, the first thing I felt was overwhelmed. But I just had to like take it piece by piece and just take it in one part at a time. And when we first walked in, we saw the wall and the things. And like, I really liked your artwork, and I just felt really connected with you because I do that stuff too. I love the wisps and the curls, and that's sort of the basis of most of the things that I draw. You know, I really do like the abstract look. And when I walked, the second thing I thought that was really powerful emotion for me was, you know, the music. I saw the music. It didn't mistake. I saw the treble clefs, I saw the notes, I saw the words, I saw everything that you had put out. I felt you reach out to me, and I felt myself connect with you. And I knew that when I looked at your work that you weren't just talking about yourself, you were explaining what you felt, and you were trying to connect with us and see if we could feel the same way. When I looked at your bouquet of scarves and, you know, your little tassel coming down, I saw your college. I saw college when I looked at it. I saw you going from high school up into college. I saw the fashion that you went through. I saw everything that you turned into, and it just burst out, and it created a new you. And not necessarily a new you, a new development of you. And I really liked it, and I really connected with your work. And I thank you for expressing yourself.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we can get maybe 2 more questions. I see 2 more hands, so.
Hi, I'm Ashley Young. I just want to start by saying you are my favorite contemporary artist by far. And
Thank you.
No problem. I started following your work about 3 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, and how I was drawn to it. I began experimenting with abstract expressionism myself, and I became really interested in the texture of spray paint. I was just looking at how could I replicate that, and my painting teacher had turned me on to your work, and I just been in love with it ever since. And yeah, well, I have one question. I know you said you have a master's in teaching. Do you teach like community classes or workshops or anything like that?
When I can. I went to do the MAT, and I taught full-time at a high school for the arts, which was kind of my karmic debt for being a rebel rouser in high school, is that I would be teaching the same grade that I was a rebel rouser. It was great working with the kids, and I keep in touch with them. Some of them they're already out of college, but it was very emotional on the day-to-day, being with kids when they need to, when they have to be there and you have to be there. So it's more of a gift for me to work with kids in different situations with the work. And yeah, I do still. I'm working with some teens in Philadelphia right now. They're also working with a spoken word artist there, and they're going to be performing at this mural site that I put together. So things like that that are kind of extra and outside of your daily, you know, have to wake up and get there, and like you're late and you need to write a pass kind of thing. Parent-teacher meetings, things like that. Grades. I'm not very good at being an authority figure, so I do still like to work with kids.
Thank you.
Okay, I saw one more hand, so this will be our last question.
Thank you. I agree with the rest of the community here that your work is extraordinary. My question is any of your paintings available as reprints, and if so, from where?
None of the, well, maybe. There might be like greeting cards of some of the paintings, but I've made prints that were separate from the work. I just made a series of 3 prints that are available through BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music. It's a benefit print. The sale of them goes to their programming. I can give you the link or the information to look. And there are links on my website, shiniquesmith.com. No, I'm just kidding. You can also email me. I answer people through there.
Shinique, thank you so much for your talk and for sharing about your work and your process and inspirations. And thank you, everyone in the audience, for your insightful comments and your questions. I hope that you'll visit the galleries after today's talk. We have plenty of time until 5 o'clock to go in and see Shinique's beautiful work in person. And let's all give her one more hand.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.